They left me in a nursing home like yesterday's trash. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't finished yet. Before I share the whole story, let me take you back to the moment everything shifted. The day they took me away, the sky was a dull, lifeless gray, the kind that feels heavy on your chest like bad news before it even arrives. I should have sensed something was off. Karen had called that morning, sweet as pie, saying she was coming over with David and Luke to help me sort out some things. Help! I should have seen through it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I braided their hair, helped with math homework, and served birthday cake. I'd even set out 4 cups of coffee, as if it were some kind of family meeting. Foolish me. I wore my pink sweater, the one George always said made my cheeks glow. I remember adjusting my lipstick in the toaster's reflection. Funny, isn't it? I wanted to look good for my children. I still wanted their love. The door slammed harder than necessary. Karen came in first, sharp and businesslike, wearing that tight expression she always had when she was lying. David followed, glued to his phone, not once looking up. Luke came last, holding some papers that made my skin crawl. "Mom," Karen began, "we've been talking." That's always how it starts, isn't it? Just before your world crumbles. She spoke in a tone you'd use with a child, soft, condescending. They said they'd found a wonderful place for me, a resort-style living center out in the hill country. It sounded like a spa commercial. I blinked, heart racing, trying to grasp it all. "I'm not going anywhere," I said calmly. "This is my home." Luke cleared his throat and slid the papers toward me. "Mom, you've been forgetting things. We just want to keep you safe." Safe from what? My own life? I wanted to scream, to throw their betrayal back at them. Instead, I stared down at my hands, the same hands that packed their lunches, sewed Halloween costumes, held them through fevers and nightmares. Hands that worked 2 jobs after George died just to keep a roof over our heads. "You've already signed the power of attorney," Karen said softly. My knees gave out. I didn't remember signing anything, but I was tired. Some days blurred together. I misplaced things. Not dangerous, just small slips. I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they'd use that trust against me. Within an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me choose which photo frames to take. Just one suitcase. That house, my house, filled with memories of love, sweat, and heartache. They took it all in an afternoon. The ride to the nursing home was silent. David drove. Karen sat beside him, tapping on her phone. And Luke stayed behind me, but never met my gaze. "Mom, you'll love it here. They have bingo nights and movie screenings," he mumbled. I wanted to laugh or slap him. I did neither. We pulled up to a beige building squeezed between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees, no garden, just concrete and bland walls. A woman in scrubs appeared, clipboard in hand, smiling too hard. That first night, I cried like a child, pressing my pillow to my face to muffle the sound. I didn't cry because of the room, or the cold sheets, or the bland food. I cried because they stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was just an obstacle, a burden to move aside. But here's the thing. I'm not one to stay down. It took weeks to stop being angry. I kept quiet and watched. I noticed the staff, kind, but stretched too thin. I saw the other residents, quiet shadows in cardigans, waiting for life's next chapter. And then I saw Ruth. She was in the common room, playing poker with a nurse, laughing like a villain from an old western. "You bet your lunch money on that hand, baby," she hollered, slapping her cards down. I smiled. the first genuine smile in weeks. She noticed. "You knew?" she asked, tilting her head. "You've got that freshly betrayed by family look." I laughed, really laughed, and just like that, Ruth pulled me in. Then there was Di, sweet as pie but sharp as a tack, a former school librarian from Vermont who noticed everything. Maxine, tough and tall, with eyes that said she'd seen it all and lived to tell the tale, joined us next. She'd taught law at a community college before a fall injured her hip. We started eating together, then playing games, and eventually meeting late at night in the lounge, sipping tea and sharing stories. One night, I told them about what happened to me. The betrayal, the house. Maxine leaned back and raised an eyebrow. "Did you sign over the deed?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I think I still own it." Ruth whistled. "Honey, if that's true, you've got gold beneath your feet and fire in your hands." That's when it began. The spark of a plan. A flicker of rebellion in a place designed for surrender. I wasn't going to sit there and fade away. If they thought they'd discarded me, they were about to find out exactly who they'd crossed. I was a Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, widow, survivor, and I was ready to ignite the world. It all started with a locked drawer in Oak Hills. The senior living space was just big enough for a twin bed, a dresser, and a narrow closet that smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint gum. I unpacked my lone suitcase with a kind of robotic numbness until I opened the last drawer and spotted something tucked in the corner. My old leather folio, the one I kept important papers in. My fingers trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was the original deed to my house. Still in my name, still legally valid. No signature from Karen, no notary stamp, just mine. I sat down hard on the bed, the papers shaking in my lap. All the feelings I'd buried, shame, heartbreak, rage, came flooding back. My children had planned to sell my house, not out of love or care, but for themselves, probably to fix it up and flip it to a young couple for profit. I clutched that deed like it was the last piece of me they hadn't stolen. For the first time since George's funeral, I prayed. Not for strength or peace, but for clarity, for a sign, and it came the next morning. Ruth burst into the dining hall wearing her lavender sweater with rhinestone buttons. Guess who's back from her son's wedding? Maxine, and she's got stories. That's how Maxine rejoined our little group. She'd been away for a week, attending her youngest son's wedding in Austin. From the way she rolled her eyes while pouring black coffee, it hadn't gone well. "New wife's a Botox doll," she muttered. "Wouldn't know a book if it hit her in the lip fillers." We laughed, but I was distracted. After breakfast, once the nurses turned their attention to the resident trying to flush magazines down the toilet, I pulled Maxine aside. "I need your help," I whispered. That afternoon, in Maxine's room, she made sure we had privacy. She always managed to find it. We spread the documents across her desk, the deed, a copy of my will, and the medical power of attorney I vaguely recalled signing after a bad fall last year, right after Karen had brought over Chinese food and an urgent form. "You didn't sign over the title," Maxine confirmed, tapping her red nails on the page. "They control your medical decisions, yes, but the house is still yours." My heart thudded. "Can they still sell it if they try and I catch it in time?" I asked. "Number. But if they forge your signature," she trailed off. I gritted my teeth. "Then I need to sell it first." She stared at me like I'd grown wings. "You're serious? You want to sell your house?" "Take that money and get out of here. I want to live before I die, Maxine." Then she surprised me with a smile. It took a few days to work out the details. We enlisted Ruth, who claimed she once dated a real estate agent and still had his number, though he was probably bald and divorced now. Dewey helped us navigate the facility's phone rules and set up a Gmail account on the community center's public computer. Maxine made the calls, the legal and financial ones. With every step, I felt like I was waking up from a long, drugged sleep. Every time I passed the nurse's station, I smiled. When Karen called with her fake sweet voice, I played the grateful, declining mother. But secretly, I was preparing my escape. The sale went quickly. My neighborhood was a hotspot for tech workers and young families. The buyer offered full asking price within hours of listing. I didn't even have to meet them. The transaction was handled through Maxine's old law contact, Jack Winston, a grumpy but brilliant man who owed her a favor from a case. We wired the money to a new account in my name, set up online with Dewey's help using the facility's public Wi-Fi. No one suspects little old ladies plotting revolutions. But the final step was the hardest. I had to disappear before they found out. We chose a Friday night. Most of the staff would be busy with bingo night in the rec room, and Ruth bribed one of the younger aides with a bottle of perfume and a pizza to forget checking in on my room. I had just one small suitcase, my passport, a printed itinerary, and 3 one-way plane tickets. On my pillow, I left a single note. Don't look for me. I've gone to reclaim the life you stole from me. Eleanor. The ride to the airport was quiet. The 3 of us squeezed into an Uber with broken air conditioning and a driver who asked no questions. When I saw the terminal lights, they felt like a kind of heaven. I bit my lip to hold back tears. Rome was our first stop, a place I'd only ever seen in movies or dreamed about quietly. Now, it was real. As the plane took off, I gazed out the window. Below, the lights of Texas twinkled like the tears I refused to shed. I didn't know what lay ahead, how long this journey would last, or how far we'd go. But I knew one thing. They'd taken everything from me. Now I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous woman alive. Rome smelled of fresh bread, ancient stone, and something sweet I couldn't quite place. Maybe freedom, maybe joy, or maybe revenge. It was my first flight in over 20 years. My legs cramped, my back ached, and I hadn't slept a wink, yet I couldn't stop smiling. Ruth snored beside me the entire flight, her head bobbing like a pigeon. Dewey held my hand during takeoff, whispering every prayer she knew, half in English and half in Latin. Maxine read a paperback thriller and sipped tomato juice as if we were on a cruise, not fugitives on a mission to reclaim ourselves. We landed in the golden glow of morning, with the eternal city stretching out below like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Cobblestone streets, flower boxes hanging from windows, and a man playing violin by a fountain. It all made my heart ache. We checked into a small pension in Trastevere. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, warm bread in the mornings, and a view of ivy-draped buildings that made you believe in poetry again. The clerk didn't bat an eye when 4 gray-haired American women with suspiciously few suitcases arrived. Rome had probably seen stranger things. That first day, we walked until our feet ached. Ruth bargained with a street vendor for scarves none of us needed. Dewey bought postcards and wrote one to her high school sweetheart, who'd died 15 years earlier. Maxine flirted with a cafe owner named Luca, who brought us tiramisu on the house. And me? I stood before the Colosseum, letting the wind wash over my face. I was nobody's burden, nobody's discarded mother. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, alive. But freedom has a way of stirring old ghosts. On our 3rd night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. 10 messages from Karen flooded my inbox. The latest subject read, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear her voice in my head. Shocked, panicked, furious. The house was gone. The money was gone. So was I. Maxine found me on the terrace, laptop on my lap, an untouched glass of wine beside me. She sat close, her knee brushing mine. "You okay?" she asked. I whispered, surprised by my own words. "I don't feel bad." I'd expected guilt. She lit a cigarette, even though she wasn't supposed to. "They had a choice, Ellie. They chose themselves. You just chose you back." The next day, we took a train to Florence. I'd always wanted to see the Duomo. Standing inside that cathedral, beneath a dome painted with heaven and hell, I thought of George and the promises we made. I'd vowed to take care of the kids no matter what. I never imagined needing to protect myself from them. That night, I found the letters. We were staying in a tiny rental with peeling wallpaper and a creaky bed. I'd unpacked my suitcase to find a lost sock, and that's when I saw the folder. I found it tucked away in a side pocket I hardly ever used, a manila folder with George's handwriting on it. Inside were 6 letters, all addressed to me, spanning 5 years before he passed. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, city sounds humming outside, and read each one. In those letters, George spoke about the kids, how he noticed their sense of entitlement, their manipulative ways, and how he worried about how they treated me when he wasn't there. He wrote about conversations with Luke that left him shaken, hints that maybe it was time for Mom to move out, even when I was perfectly healthy. He saw what was coming, but didn't know how to stop it. Then there was the last letter, written just weeks before his heart failed. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope I was wrong. But if they've turned against you, if you're alone, please remember this. You are worth more than what they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back however you can. You've always been stronger than me." I cried like a child, clutching that letter to my chest, rocking back and forth on the bed. The pain and love in his words washed over me like fire. Even then, he knew. The next morning I shared everything with the girls. Ruth was the first to speak. "Then we raise hell," she said. Maxine leaned in. "I know someone with contacts in the media. We tell your story. All of it." Dewey nodded, eyes wide. "We go public. Elder abuse, financial betrayal. You're not alone, Ellie. You could help others." And just like that, what had been my quiet refuge became a mission. We reached out again to Jack Winston, who helped us craft the story. He sent it to a journalist friend in New York, Megan Luce, who hosts a syndicated podcast and has a large following of older women eager for truth. Within days, Megan called, wanting to fly out to meet us. She said she'd been searching for a story like this for years. While we waited, we traveled. Venice, Nice, Lisbon. Everywhere we went, we danced, laughed, and took photos that looked like they belonged in a calendar for fierce grandmothers. Deep inside, I felt something changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. Then, standing on a beach in Portugal, the wind blowing through my hair, waves washing over my ankles, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Expecting a hotel confirmation, I answered, only to hear a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandma. I almost dropped the phone. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter, crying. "I found you," she said. "Please don't hang up." My heart raced. "Emily, I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Luke. I read the letters. I heard the podcast. I just want to talk to you. Please." And just like that, the ground shifted again. The past wasn't finished with me, but neither was the future. I didn't answer her immediately. The call ended with a promise. I told Emily I needed time, that I wasn't ready. My hand trembled so much, I nearly dropped the phone into the Atlantic. Ruth had to take it from me and set it on the lounge chair while I stood there, frozen, staring at the water. Later that evening, as we sat on the rooftop terrace of our guest house, the Lisbon sky stretched above us in shades of honey and blue. The sun was setting on another perfect day, yet the past had come back to find me. This time, in the voice of a child I once rocked to sleep. "She's still one of them," Maxine said firmly. "Don't let a gentle voice deceive you." But I couldn't get her out of my mind. Emily had always been different. Quiet, observant. When she was little, she would follow me around the garden, pulling weeds and asking about the birds. I kept her drawings, her crayon letters. She was the only one who kept calling me until Karen cut me off completely from the grandkids. Now she was 16, almost grown, maybe finally old enough to see things clearly. Or maybe this was just another trick, another trap. 2 days later, I received a text, a single photo. It was my old house, but nothing like I remembered. The porch was stripped bare. The rose bushes were gone. The shutters George and I painted sky blue one summer were now a dull beige. Below the photo, a short message. They trashed it. "I'm sorry." I stared at that picture for a long time, my throat tightening like someone was choking me. They hadn't just sold my home, they had gutted it. Wiped away everything I'd worked so hard to build. I showed the picture to the girls. Ruth looked away. Dewey's eyes filled with tears, and Maxine stared hard at the image before flicking her cigarette into the wind. "Time to go public," she said. The interview with Megan Luce took place in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. She carried her recording gear in a simple backpack and wore no makeup. She sat down with a warmth that felt like a comforting embrace and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I shared the sacrifices, the long nights working double shifts, the birthdays I made special with pennies and prayers. I spoke of the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal that cut deep into my soul. I told her about the night they took me from my home like I was old furniture no longer fitting the room. When I finished, Megan took my hand and said, "You are not alone. You have no idea how many women have written to me with stories like this. But yours is going to open eyes." She aired the podcast a week later. It went viral. Hundreds of thousands of downloads, messages pouring in from women across the country, survivors of the same betrayal, daughters who regretted staying silent, sons who had watched their mothers fade away quietly. I became a symbol. Not because I wanted to, but because I survived. The next day, Karen sent me a message. "How dare you?" Luke tried calling twice. David left a voicemail full of slurred anger and veiled threats. I deleted them all. Then Emily emailed me. She said she had left home, was staying with her aunt on her father's side, and couldn't look at her mother without hearing my story in her mind. She wanted to meet, not in Texas, anywhere else. "Please," she wrote. "I just want to know you again." Maxine warned me. Ruth hesitated. Dewey squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes healing means opening a door, just one more time." So I picked the place, Savannah, Georgia, a city smelling of magnolia and memories. It had always been on my list. We flew there the next week. Emily was waiting in Forsyth Park, sitting on a bench beneath a moss-draped oak. When she saw me, she stood up, eyes wide, tears already shining. She looked like her mother before Karen turned cold. But there was something else in her expression, something raw, something searching. "Hi, Grandma," she said. My voice nearly failed me. "Hi, sweetheart." We walked for hours. She asked about George, my childhood, the day they took me. She said she found the letters by accident, rummaging through Karen's filing cabinet for her birth certificate. She told me she confronted them, and Karen slapped her. "I couldn't stay after that," she whispered. Looking at this young woman, still half a girl, something inside me cracked open. I didn't want to carry anger anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted healing, not for them, for me. I hugged her tightly, feeling like I left fingerprints on her soul. That night, back with the girls, I told them everything. Ruth wiped away a tear. Dewey smiled softly. Maxine said, "Well, damn. Guess there's hope for at least one of them." We stayed another week in Savannah. Emily became a regular part of our lives, joining us for dinners, walks by the water, and sharing stories beneath the stars. At first, it was awkward, but soon it felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater for so long. One evening, she turned to me and asked, "What if we started a place for women like you, like us?" I didn't reply right away, but the next morning, over coffee and grits, I said, "We're going to build it." I wasn't sure how yet, but I had the funds, the name, the Eleanor Grace Foundation, and a granddaughter willing to stand with me instead of against me. The past was a wound, but the future? Oh, the future was a flame waiting to be sparked. The Eleanor Grace Foundation began as a simple idea scribbled on a napkin over pancakes at a diner on River Street. Emily decorated the name with little stars, her handwriting still loopy and uncertain like a child's, while mine was blocky and steady, shaped by life's challenges. We didn't know where to begin, but we shared a mission: to protect women like me, mothers, grandmothers, widows, women who had been erased, silenced, exploited, and abandoned by those they had given their all to. It wasn't just about money. It was about restoring dignity. Emily took charge. With a sharp mind and fire in her belly that reminded me of George, she handled registering the foundation, building the website, and writing the text for the landing page. She connected with senior advocates and legal advisors. She launched a GoFundMe that went viral. Hundreds of women shared their stories, and thousands donated with messages like, "This happened to my mom. Thank you for speaking up. I thought I was alone." We started small, a pilot program in Savannah, offering a free legal clinic once a week, sending resource packets to women in nursing homes, and hosting support groups on Zoom. Seeing my name on the homepage felt surreal, like meeting someone I'd only just come to know fully. Meanwhile, the media kept calling: Newsweek, CNN, NPR. But I turned most of them down. I wasn't a spectacle or a trend. I was a woman who'd survived and created something meaningful from the ashes. I wanted impact, not attention. One interview I agreed to was with a local Savannah station. The reporter, a woman my age named Lorraine, gently asked at the end, "If you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be?" I looked into the camera and said steadily, "I forgive you, but I'll never forget who I became because of you." That clip went viral. Karen saw it and left me a voicemail after 6 months of silence. I never listened. Whatever she wanted to say, she'd had decades to say it before. That chapter was closed. Luke tried to sue me, accusing me of stealing the house from under them. The judge dismissed the case in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even attend. Maxine went in my place, and from what I heard, she tore him apart in her closing statement. David moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since, and that's just fine with me. Emily became both my shadow and my guiding light. She traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York, a cozy 5-bedroom house where women displaced by family abuse or neglect could find safety. We named it Grace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees gave out. Ruth had to steady me. Speaking of Ruth, she met someone. Yes, that Ruth. It happened on a cruise we all took to Alaska the following spring. His name was Dennis, widower, bad dancer, excellent with chocolate martinis. She said he made her laugh like no one else ever had. Now they spend half the year in Florida, arguing over shuffleboard and pretending not to be hopelessly in love. Dewey started a poetry blog that somehow gained thousands of followers. She writes about grief and healing, and every entry ends with a little line just for me. And still, Eleanor rises. Maxine, oh Maxine, she's now our legal director, commanding the courtroom like she was born for it. She applies red lipstick every day, calling it her armor. As for me, I'm still on the road, still sharing my story, still fighting. The last thing I did before the year ended was visit my old house, not to face anyone, not to grieve, but simply to see it. It had been repainted. The porch was renovated. New owners lived there, a young couple with a baby swing hanging in front. I stood across the street, unnoticed, just an elderly woman wearing sunglasses and a scarf. I smiled to myself. That house was no longer my home. Home was wherever I stood in my truth, wherever women came together to support one another, wherever Eleanor Grace Miller refused to be forgotten. As I walked away, a breeze drifted through the street, carrying the scent of roses from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment I could almost feel George's hand in mine. "We did it," I whispered. "We made it." And in that quiet, sacred moment, I understood that this was not the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The cruise ship resembled a floating palace, gleaming white against the deep blue water, its name, Celestial Dawn, written in gold letters on the side. We boarded in Seattle beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms, their petals drifting in the breeze like a blessing. The air was filled with the scent of salt and fresh beginnings. This was our reward, our celebration, one last promise fulfilled before the next chapter unfolded. I stood on the upper deck with Ruth, Dewey, and Maxine as the ship slowly pulled away from the shore. Emily was below, finishing a virtual meeting for the foundation. She was leading a grant proposal to open 3 more homes in the Midwest. She had blossomed into this fierce, radiant woman, and I thanked God every day that she had found her way back to me and herself. "Can you believe we're really doing this?" Dewey asked, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf that fluttered in the wind. "We should have done this 30 years ago," Ruth said, sipping champagne and laughing. "But hey, better late than never," Maxine replied, pointing toward the horizon. "Look at that sky. I want to paint it, with a martini in my hand." We all laughed, the kind of laughter that feels like air rushing back after nearly drowning. That night, we dressed in our finest and dined in the ship's ballroom. The lighting was soft and warm, like candlelight. The chairs were plush velvet, the silverware heavier than necessary, and the waiters smiled as if sharing some elegant secret. Halfway through dessert, molten chocolate cake with raspberry drizzle, the band began to play. Not loud or flashy, just the gentle strains of an old Ella Fitzgerald song. Something stirred inside me. I stood up. "I want to dance," I said. "For the first time in years, I want to dance." Maxine raised her eyebrows. Ruth beamed. Dewey softly clapped, already reaching for her camera. There was no partner waiting, no one across the ballroom to join me. Just me, wearing a navy dress I'd bought on a whim in Florence, shoes that pinched, and a heart that was overflowing. But I stepped onto the floor anyway. The band watched me. The other passengers glanced up. I closed my eyes and I danced. I moved slowly and gracefully to music that wrapped around me like memory. I danced for every night I had cried alone, for every holiday my children forgot, for every woman sitting in a sterile room wondering if her life had already ended. I danced for George, for Emily, and for myself. At some point, I felt arms wrap around me. Someone had stepped onto the dance floor. Strong, steady hands took mine. I opened my eyes to see Dennis, Ruth's gentleman companion, smiling softly. He said nothing, and didn't have to. Gradually, more people joined in. Older couples, solo dancers, a small crowd of strangers moving together beneath the glow of the chandeliers. We danced, not as if we were young again, but as if we had finally, truly remembered who we were. The music slowed, the final note lingered, and then came the applause. Not loud or flashy, but warm, deep, and sincere. Back at the table, Emily had joined the women. She stood and opened her arms as I approached her. "You looked like you were flying," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I was," I replied. "For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else." Later that night, we stood on the balcony outside our shared suite. The sea stretched endlessly before us, moonlight shimmering on the waves. The northern lights began to appear, green and violet ribbons undulating in the dark sky. We watched quietly for a long time. "Do you ever miss them?" Emily asked softly, nodding toward my children. I took a breath. "I miss who I thought they were. I miss the hope, but not the pain." She rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry they hurt you." I kissed the top of her head. "You didn't. And you're helping mend what they broke. That's more than I ever dreamed of." The sky danced above us. The water whispered promises of new beginnings. And in that moment, I stood not as a victim, not even just a survivor, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, founder, fighter. I knew then I had finally come home, not to a place, but to myself. We arrived in Juneau just as the sun began to set behind the icy peaks, casting golden light across the ship's bow. The harbor was calm, gentle waves lapping at the dock as we stepped onto solid ground, bundled in layers with our breath curling in the cold Alaskan air. While the others chose to explore local shops and sample crab legs, Emily and I took a different path. We booked a small helicopter tour, something neither of us had done before. Neither of us liked heights, but that was the point. "I want to see the world from above," I told her. Our pilot, a woman named Sam, with a voice rough as gravel and the steady calm of someone familiar with storms, helped us into our seats. Emily gripped my hand tightly as the rotors began to turn. I smiled foolishly. As we lifted into the sky, the world below began to shrink. Juneau transformed into a tiny town inside a snow globe. The mountains stretched out vast, white, and wild. Glaciers cracked and shimmered like rivers of ancient glass. We hovered over one of the largest glaciers when the sun broke through the clouds, turning the ice into something almost sacred. I had never seen anything so immense, so pristine. It made me feel small, not in a negative way, but with a beautiful, awe-filled sense that everything I had endured had led to this moment. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Emily said softly through the headset. I turned to her, tears stinging my eyes. "I almost did, you know. But then you called." She squeezed my hand. I think you saved me, too. We landed on a flat stretch of ice, wrapped in thermal blankets as we stepped out into the crisp air. It was just the two of us, and the silence of snow, the kind that hushes everything: pain, memories, fear. I took out the last letter George had written, the one I had carried with me all this time, and I let it go. I watched the letter drift across the ice, carried by the wind, weightless. It fluttered, spun, and vanished into the white expanse. It was time to let go of the burden I'd been carrying. Later that night, we returned to the ship to find the others waiting with champagne. To Eleanor, Ruth toasted, raising her glass high. The fiercest woman I've ever known. To Grace, said Dewey, in all its forms. To second chances, Maxine added with a wink. Emily leaned in and gently clinked her glass with mine. To beginnings, we all drank beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets and love. Laughter echoed across the deck, carried softly by the sea. When I closed my eyes that night, I didn't dream of the past, but of the healing still to come, not as a mother forgotten or a woman discarded, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, reborn, redeemed, and finally, completely free. The final morning of the cruise arrived wrapped in fog and a quiet stillness, the kind that feels like the world pauses just long enough to say goodbye. I stood at the ship's railing, coffee in hand, watching Alaska's coastline fade behind us. I expected sadness, but instead, I felt full. Emily joined me, still in pajamas, her wool scarf wrapped carelessly around her neck. Today feels different, she said. It is, I replied. It's the last day of running. She looked puzzled. Running from what? I turned to face her fully. From grief, from guilt, from everything I thought I failed to be. Her eyes softened. You didn't fail, Grandma. They did. I smiled gently. Maybe. But I don't want my life to be defined by what others did to me. I want it to be shaped by what I chose to do anyway. After breakfast, we held a small ceremony, just the five of us, in a private lounge away from the crowds. There was no stage, no speeches, only stories. We took turns naming women we'd known who were silenced, discarded, or forgotten. Ruth spoke of her sister. Dewey read a poem she'd written the night before. Maxine lit 5 candles, one for each of us, and one for every woman we'd met on our journey who never got to live freely. I shared the story of my life, not the pain or betrayal, but the parts I'd rediscovered. Planting tomatoes with George, rocking babies on the porch, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. I told them about my first kiss behind the bleachers, the time I hitchhiked across state lines with my best friend at 17, and the Christmas I surprised the kids with a puppy named Comet. I spoke of the fire inside me and how for years I let others pour water on it. But here's the thing about fire, I said, my voice steady. If you protect the spark long enough, it will burn again. We each took our candle and set it afloat in a glass bowl, watching the flames flicker and drift on the water's surface. I looked around at the women who saved me, who reminded me of who I was, and at Emily, my legacy, and my future. I'm going home, I said softly. 4 heads turned toward me. I'm not going back to Texas, I clarified, but I'm building something permanent, a real place, a headquarters for the foundation, a retreat, a home for any woman who needs one. Maxine grinned. Where? I took a breath. Where it all began, Savannah. They all nodded. It made sense. It always had. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. It was a white 2-story house with green shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around like welcoming arms. We built it with donations, love, and the unyielding determination of women who refused to be erased. Emily became the executive director. Ruth and Dennis hosted monthly supper clubs. Dewey led writing workshops. Maxine offered pro bono legal consultations every Friday. And me? I sat on that porch every morning with a cup of coffee, watching the world come to us. Women arrived with trembling hands and broken stories, leaving with light in their eyes. Sometimes I shared my story. Other times, I simply listened because I had learned something powerful. That sometimes the greatest redemption isn't just surviving what they did to you. It's choosing to become someone they never expected. Someone stronger, someone free, someone unforgettable. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller, and this is the legacy I carry. Not built from buildings or wealth, but from the flame I passed on and the women who continue to nurture it. It was our first Thanksgiving at Grace Haven. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting a golden glow across the wooden floors. The air was rich with the scents of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, the leaves had just begun to fall in Savannah, painting the lawn in reds and oranges that crunched beneath every step. Wind chimes hung on the porch, gently whispering memories into the breeze. Inside, laughter filled the room. True laughter, the kind born from the heart, not just politeness. The long dining table, gifted by a woman once told by her husband she wasn't fit to host, was now set with a mix of mismatched plates and silverware, candles flickering between serving dishes. Around it sat 22 women, some adorned with pearls, others in jeans, all wearing hope on their faces. Grace Haven had only been open for 3 months. 3 months, yet we had already transformed lives. Olivia had escaped a marriage that silenced her for 35 years. Harriet was left homeless after her adult son drained her savings and vanished. Rosa, at 71, finally learned to read and now left sticky notes around her home with words she loved. Light, soft, beginning. I sat at the head of the table, not by my request, but because the others insisted. They said I was the reason they had come. But as I looked around, I knew the truth. They were the reason I felt whole again. I stood to offer a toast, not a speech, just a few heartfelt words. Raising my glass, apple cider with a splash of bourbon, just like George used to make it, I began. This year, I didn't lose everything. The room fell silent. Instead, I found everything I had been missing. I glanced at Ruth and Dennis sitting side by side, hands intertwined. At Maxine carving turkey like she was presiding over a courtroom. At Di handing out her homemade apple pie and passing napkins to a girl with tears in her eyes. At Emily, my granddaughter, the fiercest and kindest soul I've ever known, standing behind me like a lighthouse. I found myself, I said, my voice trembling. I found family, not by blood, but by choice. I found purpose rising from the ashes of pain. And I want you all to know this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for those who rise. The room burst into clinking glasses, quiet tears, and applause that felt like music made just for us. Later, as the sun dipped and candles flickered low, I stepped out onto the porch. Emily joined me. "You never told me what you wished for," she said, nudging my shoulder. "What do you mean?" I asked. "That night in Alaska," she said, "when you let George's letter go. What did you wish for then?" I smiled. "I wished," I said, "that someday someone would truly see me for who I am. And now? Now I wish that someone else finds their worth before it's too late." She leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. You're changing the world, Grandma. No, baby, I whispered. We are. We sat together, 2 generations of fire, watching stars appear one by one, like tiny promises written across the night sky. Winter arrived softly in Savannah. Unlike the harsh cold I remembered from Texas, here it came like a gentle hush. Crisp mornings filled with the scent of pine and clove, soft blankets, and slow walks beneath gray skies. Grace Haven glowed with string lights and quiet miracles. Every room held a story, like Clara's. She arrived with only a suitcase and a photo of her late husband. Her children had emptied her bank account and left her in a motel 2 towns away. At first, she barely spoke, but after weeks in our garden, her hands found their way back to the earth, and with it, her voice. Another story belonged to Naomi, a former nurse who had been placed in assisted living against her wishes. Now, she taught yoga each morning, seated in a chair, guiding breathing exercises for women whose hearts were still learning to trust again. Every time a new woman arrived, I saw a reflection of myself, the version of me in that beige nursing home, suitcase at my feet, faith slipping through my fingers. And with each welcome, I grew stronger. In January, we held a special event, our first night of names. It was Dewey's idea, and it was beautiful. We stood in a circle, each holding a small candle, and spoke the name of a woman we wished to honor, a mother, a friend, or a version of ourselves left behind. When it was my turn, I said simply, Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed too quiet for too long. I let the silence stretch, not out of sorrow, but out of respect. That woman, that part of me, deserved to be remembered. She kept going without thanks, loved even when it hurt, and finally stood up when it counted the most. After the ceremony, Emily found me in the kitchen, tears still drying on her cheeks. I want to write a book, she said. About you. About all of this? I laughed. You think people would want to read about a grandma who sold her house behind her kids' backs and ran off to Italy with a bunch of retired rebels? Yes, she said, completely serious. Because out there, Grandma, are all the women who feel stuck, who believe it's too late, who think they're too old to change anything. I want them to know it's never too late. That night, I began jotting notes in a spiral notebook. Memories, lessons, truths no one teaches until it's almost too late. I wasn't sure if it would turn into a book, a blog, or a box of letters for the next generation. But one thing was certain. My voice would not fall silent again. February brought unexpected news. Our foundation was nominated for a national honor, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, given to initiatives that empower older women with dignity, independence, and a voice. Maxine read the email aloud in the common room. Ruth screamed. Doey cried. Emily twirled me around the coffee table. A week later, the local news returned to film a segment. This time, they didn't just interview me, they interviewed all of us, the women of Grace Haven. Each shared her story, and the cameras captured something words couldn't fully express: their strength. When the segment aired, we received over 3,000 emails in 48 hours. 3,000 women asking for help. Daughters reaching out for their mothers. Grandmothers asking if there was a Grace Haven nearby. We were overwhelmed and then determined. We began expanding. Another home opened in Asheville, another in Michigan, and a third planned for Oregon in the fall. Throughout it all, I kept my morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, notebook in hand, a quiet prayer on my lips. Not for justice anymore, but for joy, for the life I never imagined I'd get to live. And every so often, I'd see a woman walk up our path for the first time, shoulders hunched, eyes guarded, and I'd rise to greet her, take her hand, and whisper softly, just loud enough for her heart to hear. You're not lost. You're just beginning. That year, spring arrived early, as if even the trees and flowers grew impatient for new life. Grace Haven was bursting with blooms, wisteria twining around the porch railings, daffodils shooting up from the garden like tiny trumpets of hope. Everything felt fresh, vibrant, like the world had turned a page. And I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's idea for a book had taken root. We named it Not Done Yet. She wove together my stories, my letters, and fragments from the women I'd met along the way, creating something more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just a memoir, it was a testimony, a bold statement. We celebrated its launch with a garden party right here at Grace Haven, inviting every woman who'd ever walked through our doors, and their families. Even some of the children who'd once been the reason those women came to us in the first place. People do change. Not all, but some. Enough to restore a bit of faith in the world. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. David. Luke sent a bitter letter through his lawyer, claiming the book defamed him. We didn't respond. But Emily's parents, her father and stepmother, did attend, bringing flowers. Thank you, her father said softly, for bringing her back to us stronger. Later that night, after the guests left, after the lights were taken down and cake plates stacked in the sink, I sat on the porch again, the same chair, the same mug, the same stars above, and finally let myself remember everything. Not just the pain, but the love too. George, the babies I'd held, the home I once had, the silence I endured, the fight I found, and the legacy I built with bare, battered hands. Maxine joined me, a blanket draped over her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved goodnight from their little cottage across the garden. Dowie was inside, working on a new poem about reclaiming your bloom. Maxine nudged my arm. You did it, you know. Did what? I asked. You rewrote the ending. I looked at her, eyes soft with the kind of peace that only comes after the storm. No, I whispered. I just started telling the truth. She chuckled, that gravelly, no-nonsense laugh that carried us through the worst of it. In that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be chosen, not to be heard, not to be seen. I was here, fully present. And for every woman who's ever felt small, pushed aside, silenced, or forgotten, I left these words, not carved in stone, but etched into the hearts of everyone we touched. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet. And neither am I. The day the award letter arrived, I was in the kitchen with Emily, making lemon bars. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and thick, catching the dust of flowers in the air. We were laughing, God, laughing, about something ridiculous Ruth had said the day before. The way her dentures had flown halfway across the table during a heated game of Scrabble. Then the mail arrived. It wasn't fancy, just a cream-colored envelope with our names typed neatly on the front. Eleanor G. Miller and Emily Grace Weston, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. Emily opened the letter first. Her hands shook partway through, and without a word, she handed it to me. I took it, my heart heavy and slow, and read aloud. Congratulations. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant in recognition of your tireless work empowering women and restoring dignity to those long forgotten. We honor you with a lifetime endowment to continue and expand your mission. I sank into the closest chair. It wasn't the money, though Lord knows it would help us open 3 more Grace Havens by the end of the year. It was those words. We honor you. No one had ever said that to me before. Emily knelt beside me, her face radiant. You did this, she said. You made this world. No, I whispered. We made it together. The following weekend, we held a celebration, not just for the grant, but for the lives we'd helped heal. Over 100 women gathered in the garden, some in wheelchairs, some using walkers, some with silver braids and lipstick, all carrying stories etched in the lines around their eyes. There were hugs and reunions, off-key songs, and speeches spoken through tears. They crowned me with a flower wreath Ruth had made herself. A simple thing, really, daisies and ivy. But I wore it like a queen, because for the first time I understood what royalty truly meant. It wasn't about ruling. It was about rising. That night, after the last lantern was dimmed and the guests had gone to sleep, I sat alone in my room. The award certificate lay on the table beside me. Next to it, George's final letter, the copy I'd printed and framed, tucked in the corner with a photo of us on our wedding day, young, bright-eyed, and completely unaware of the world ahead. For the first time in my life, I spoke to him aloud. I did it, George. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew. My voice cracked, but I wasn't alone. A soft knock interrupted me. Emily peeked inside. Sorry, she said. Just wanted to say goodnight. Come sit, I said, patting the bed beside me. She curled up like she did as a child, resting her head on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, I told her. I'm proud of you, she whispered back. You turned ashes into light. We sat there together, no need for more words, the quiet between us full of everything sacred. When she finally left, I stood at the window, gazing out over the garden where so many had found healing, where I had healed. And I realized this wasn't a second chance at life. It was the life I had always deserved. With the moon glowing overhead and spring heavy in the air, I closed my eyes and smiled. I had finally come home, not to a house, but to myself.